Second.
There's one addition I believe we want to add. Did you want to have a correction or a change to minutes, Manager Culkins, for February 11? We got an email on, I don't know what the changes are, but...
Yeah, Chuck was going to go over them. I think I've got the only copy with the changes on it.
Well, let's put that down as 10.6 and we'll see, take it up as an action item.
Yeah, I guess I could just pass this around if you want to take a look at it. And when we get there, they will have seen it. So.
All right, thank you.
And I want to add point 3, a conflict, I guess.
I'm sorry, you said 4.3?
Yeah.
And what is the item?
A conflict.
As an information item?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Yes.
If we would like to add a meeting and available date, put it on the schedule.
Let's look at them when we get to this, when we get to the scheduled meetings. And that works for me. Anything else? Those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Under information items and correspondence, we have an E-grade update from Ms. Christensen and Ms. Dooley, and a Minnehaha Creek 100-year flood maps, Ms. Schaufler. In the correspondence, we have an invitation from the Minnesota Association of Watershed Districts to the legislative day and legislative briefing and day at the Capitol at the end of March. And Manager Miller, what did you want to comment?
I've got a perceived conflict. It's not a direct conflict, but I want to read it into the record. My wife got a call from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. They were referred by the city of Edina because we've got a well, and they want to test it. And my wife didn't want the state to test it. She wanted a private company. So I contracted with Wink to do the test, and at the retail price for doing drawing the water and doing the test.
Okay, disclosure, nothing, no actions necessary. On the consent agenda, we have approval of the minutes of February 25, 2016, and a resolution 16-017, authorization to contract with Wank Associates for consulting services for the Ecosystem Evaluation Program for July 1 this year to December 31st in 2017. Is there a motion to approve the consent items?
Approval.
Is there a second? Manager Olson, Miller and Olson, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Under Board Committee and Task Force reports, I'll mention two items. One is that we have just completed just this morning the suite of meetings with the policymakers in 6 Mile Creek sub-watershed. That was a phase in the planning for the sub-watershed, and Anna Brown, James Whisker, and Lars Erdahl, together with either Manager Olson or I, attended meetings with the 2 counties, 3 Rivers Park District, and 4 municipalities. And I would say that the reaction was largely on the enthusiastic end of the scale. You agree?
Totally.
Your experience too. They reacted well to what a couple of people I heard call our holistic approach to the folks' geography planning and to the work in 6 Mile. So those were very productive meetings, and particularly want to thank planning staff and communication staff for the materials that we used in those meetings. The second item is that we have the print copy here tonight of the 2015 year in review. We had electronic at the previous meeting, and I had looked back, taken a second look at that during the week as I prepared for this meeting, and just impressed and reminded all over again of what good quality work was done in 2015, of the assiduous and inventive way that our staff works to help us reach our mission. So I appreciate all that's done by our staff and consultants. That's my report. Manager Calkins, do you want to give a CAC report?
No, I was there.
Ah, Mr. Miller.
There was 13 members out of the 16 were there, and they had a report on the ecosystem evaluation program, which was really a good report, and it was it was received very enthusiastically, as well as the comprehensive plan. Our staff has been making this presentation to a point where it's really polished and it's really understood, and the CAC members were really pleased with that quality of that program as well. One of the discussion items they're working on is their involvement with the board itself, and they're probably going to be sending representatives to the committee meetings and to the board meetings to report back to the CAC, not only the actions that were taken, but the flavor and the attitudes and stuff about the various programs moving forward, because they want to be more engaged in knowing what we're doing, so they can develop their work program to concur with ours. So that'll I think they've already made assignments to attend the board meetings and committee meetings.
Thank you. Any questions of Manager Miller? Thank you. The upcoming meeting and event schedule is printed, and Manager Olson, you wanted to ask to have something added?
Yeah, in light of us not having had our committee meeting this month, because the agenda item was pushed out, we'd like to put it back on the agenda for the 31st. It's the extra Thursday of the month.
Okay.
And I've talked with Manager Blix. I haven't talked to Manager Calkins yet, but I'd like to schedule it for that time. And
Manager Rogness?
oh, I'm sorry.
Deja vu all over again. or
All
something
over
like
again, I'm
that.
sorry. But what we want to do is cover it at that time, and also discuss with Dave some other items that we want to trim up. So if there is an objection, we'd like to add that. And then we'll go through that agenda with Dave now.
Does that work from the staff point of view, Mr. Erdahl? So 3:31.
This would involve the AIS information that was pushed out in the first week.
I'll confirm. I think we can plan on it, and then I'll let you know if there's any difficulties with that.
Great. We just wanted to have that meeting prior to the retreat. Thanks.
Item 8.1, the stream data statistical analysis presentation from Ms. Christensen, and Mr. Hatch is here as well.
So, President White, managers, about a year ago, we received approval from the board to work with WSB and working on performing statistical analysis on some of our stream sites in the watershed. And our objective was to see if adjacent sites on the same stream were significantly different from one another, and if not, be able to create an anchor site that could be used to represent two or more of those sites. And so tonight I have Lauren Hatch here from WSB, who will be presenting the report and his findings to the board.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Hatch.
Thank you.
Do you want to, we can turn that on?
Sure. Mr. President, members of the board, is this working?
Yes. Works better for shorter people.
It's in the
When I
middle.
tell jokes, it's in the same quiet.
Down the center there.
the same quiet response that I told Chuck. Is this working? Is this working? Okay. Again, I prefer to
Better.
stand because I like kind of a teaching thing here. This is probably the third sort of round of statistical work I've done on some of the data since I did a lot of the data collecting myself about 10 years ago. But as Yvette pointed out, really we're trying to find some efficiencies here. You know, save some staff time and effort by looking at the data and saying, hey, we do or don't need to sample all these stations on the same creek. So hopefully, there we go. So just briefly, I'm going to go over, summarize the report sort of at a 5,000 foot level, and hopefully not bore you with statistical methods too much, and then give some recommendations as well. You're all familiar with this place, this watershed district. So we're really focusing on 10 streams on Minnehaha Creek itself. There are some more sites than 10, but those 10 have kind of been anchor sites for many, many years, and we've got enough data to really say what's going on between them. There's also 2 locations on Long Lake Creek, and 5 locations on Painters Creek, and I don't know if you can, I'm sure you're all familiar where Stubbs Bay is and Clawson Creek, over past Orono, and that was the 4th creek that we examined with our statistical analysis. So this just kind of sums it up. The numbers in parentheses represent the number of stations, and I guess here we go. First of all, Minnehaha Creek, I don't know if we can see very well, but certainly if the headwaters on the far upper left is Grays Bay, and that pours over the dam, and the CMH 07 is the Grays Bay Dam site, the first location along the creek. As you pass downstream, back behind the office here is Site 25, and that's only been around for a year or 2. But the next one, 19, is at the 494 interchange. It really kind of forms what looks like a creek. Then going several stream miles downstream, Site 2 and Site 11. And finally, you pass through the Meadowbrook Lake over by the hospital. Site 03 is just downstream from the dam, the mill pond on 50th, Edina. Kind of swings to the south. There's Site 04, swings back up, sort of towards Lake Harriet. It's a site called CMH 15. I'll talk a little bit more about that. C15, there's actually a Site 12 that was a block away, and the reason that was established is because it was the borderline of Edina and Minneapolis, and they wanted some data to show this is what we're bringing into Minneapolis, or what we're not bringing into Minneapolis. That's my understanding. The next major site is Site 24, just next to Nokomis on the creek. And you pass through Lake Hiawatha, and just on the other side is Site 18, and then finally Site 6 is at Hiawatha Avenue at the USGS gauge. Painters Creek, familiar. The northernmost site in the center of the diagram there is Site 03. It's at Deborah Drive. Then as it passes through over this way, you're probably familiar, that's a gigantic wetland complex, a place called the Potato Farms over there. And where the creek really sort of comes back and looks like a creek is Site 4 in the lower left. And then there's a series of sites, Site 6, Site 1, and Site 5, just before it pours into the backwaters of Jennings Bay. The Long Lake subwatershed, we're really only examining the outlet of Long Lake in the center of the diagram, the CLO 01. As you follow that down towards Tanager Lake, it's the CLO 03, which is at the corner of, I memory serves, Brown and Fox. It's the last culvert on the way, but it kind of gets impacted by backwaters of the lake, so there's not a really good location to locate it. But those are the two we're looking at in this study. Then finally, Classen Creek. There's a site on Watertown Road, the site CCL04, and then one down right by Bayside Road, where it pours into Stubbs Bay. So, this is the boring part. I looked at data spanning, data is collected in the streams, typically get ice out, which seems to be happening earlier every year. But the best data seemed to be, it was from April through October, and at the time looking at 2005 to 2014 data. And typically there's 25 to 35 data pairs for each comparison. And just to jump ahead a little bit, only data from the exact same day was compared. So if you had those two sites on, say, Long Lake Creek, one was sampled on a Thursday, and then another one was sampled the next Monday, I threw those points out. I wanted them sampled on the exact same day, so you're comparing apples to apples. You can see the type of data that has been collected. There's data collected with a probe, temperature, dissolved oxygen, etc. And then looked at three primary wet chemistry parameters, 2 phosphorus, 1 sediment. Outliers were removed using a statistical program, SPSS. There were more than 3 standard deviations away from the mean. And I found that the raw data wasn't typically normally distributed, the bell curve. So you apply transformations to it, like square root, 1 over x, blah, 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 to try to make it look like a bell curve, and it didn't really work for all the data. So you use non-parametric stuff. So I used the Kruskal-Wallis test, and
I'm a little confused. What is that term you just used?
the Kruskal-Wallis test. It's a statistical test to compare mean values if you don't have the bell curve distribution. You can't use parametric methods. So there's a little more detail in the report if you want to go into that, or I'll talk to you about it. Okay, here's sort of where the rubber hits the road. First of all, let's look at the upper section of Minnehaha Creek, and I'll describe, let's see, let's come out. There we go. I'll describe how to read these charts. Basically, we have the month here, this column. These are the water quality variables, temperature, etc. And this is a comparison. This is the actual lake station, Grays Bay, and this is the dam site on the creek there. So what we do is we take all the data from, for example, say all the temperature data from April for those two stations where the points matched up between the years 2005, 2014. And you compare them. So what we've got here is a head-to-head comparison. And basically what this table says is the only time you found a statistically significant difference between any of these parameters in any of these months was October for pH. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. I tried to...
That was the .05 difference.
Yeah, so that's, again, it's a statistical measure. However, if you look at, say, the Grays Bay outlet and then the station at the 494, the yellow represents a lot of differences. Well, to think about it, what happens between those two stations? You're flowing through a gigantic wetland system, and you might expect them to be different. So, in that sense, these are very different. These are showing very different behavior, and that is maybe a point of justifying that you should probably not toss one or either of those out. But I'll get into more detail on that later. I compared. I didn't compare 19 to 2 because I thought the distance was quite. You really kind of need some density of points, and it'd be kind of bad to toss that point out randomly because it's several miles in here, and you want to see what's going on in this area with regards to water quality. So I compared 2 to 11, and You're seeing some differences in phosphorus during certain parts of the month, but not as great a difference as you're seeing between the dam outlet and 494. The middle section, just briefly, we looked at that site at below the Browndell Dam and a few miles downstream. Not many differences popped up. If we compare this site downstream to this sort of the Edina Minneapolis border site, there's absolutely no differences between those two. And just for grins, I looked, well, let's look at this one at Browndell and this one down here. Let's skip right over. And you're seeing a few more differences. That's kind of because you're moving farther downstream. You're seeing some impacts, perhaps, from loading and from the cities and from stream bank erosion, et cetera. And then finally, in the bottom right, I looked at, well, what's going on at this point here, this 04 point, and then clear down almost to Lake Nokomis. You're seeing a few differences. Surprisingly, I thought we'd see a lot more, but we didn't. And finally, the lower section, if you look at the upper left, we're comparing that site just before Lake Nokomis and then the site right after Lake Hiawatha. You're seeing quite a few differences there, and that may be probably by and large in part by just the fact that you're slowing the water down. Once you hit Lake Hiawatha, stuff's starting to settle out, so you're seeing some differences. If we compare the site just below Lake Hiawatha and then sort of the last station down by the tracks, there's not that many differences. And again, just for completeness, I look, well, let's look up above Nokomis and then down by Hiawatha Avenue, and you're seeing a reasonable amount of differences statistically.
Can I ask a quick question, actually?
Sure.
Can you go back 2 slides?
Yeah.
So in this section, like the difference between Station 4 and Station 15, there's not a lot. Ooh. Uh-oh. So there's not a lot of a difference between 4 and 15.
No.
Does that mean it could just be equally bad? And that there's not
Sure.
been a marked increase in water quality? And I'm not implying that, but I mean, could that?
You just can't tell us the difference statistically between them. So it's just saying that perhaps water quality isn't changing that much in this stretch. I mean, certainly you've got the Hamill Park sort of spur coming in here.
So the reason I'm asking is because I mean the data is from 05 to 14.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in 15 we just funded was it Cynthia Krieg, or we just funded something in this neighborhood that was supposed to have some sort of benefit. And if that data wasn't incorporated into this, like, would the results of the model change? And I'm really kind of positing that. I'm not necessarily looking for an answer, but
Yeah.
Well, realize this is just one way of looking at the data too.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah.
So, I don't know, to answer your question, whether you're suggesting perhaps that if we had known this, maybe you wouldn't have funded that project?
No, I mean, like if the purpose of this exercise was to identify sampling stations that could be taken offline because the results don't deviate over a period of time, and if in that period of time there's been no investment in infrastructure or anything that would affect water quality, I don't know how.
Yeah. See, this is you're really averaging over many years. So, you know, if you took, I don't know, say 2005 to 2007 data, and then you took 2020 to 2022 in the future, you may very well see impacts of projects between those locations.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I get that we're trying to. I don't know if the exercise was intended to like identify ways to save money or to.
It's just to look at, you know, you're getting the same kind of information.
And as later in the presentation, I'll talk about, well, what would happen if you drop that site? There are good relationships between a lot of these locations, some XY plots of the variables. I mean, very good relationships. So if you, kind of getting ahead of myself, but say, for example, you dropped 15 in the future, 2 years from now, you're like, gosh, I wish I had a measurement there. You could go back and take this data and with reasonable accuracy extrapolate. And I'll show some of the figures. I don't know if you had a chance to look in the report in the back. There's all these plots, and you can see there's pretty reasonably tight relationships for many of these parameters. So,
Thank you.
sure. Okay, I think I went through this. Didn't I? Yeah. Okay. Good. Painter Creek. Again, upper left. This is really comparing that site way upstream to the next site below, sort of the massive wetland complex 04, and you can see there's a fair amount of differences there, which you might expect. So now let's see what's going on in this sort of lower, sort of more stream-like channelized area. Comparing this 4 and the 6, you don't see a lot of differences there, except for dissolved oxygen. I'll explain that in a second. If you go to this site 6 and site 1, again, you're seeing a large difference in, you're seeing differences in dissolved oxygen, some in pH and a lot in sediment. And then the final 2 stations, you're not seeing really any difference at all. And what's interesting is, if you look at the dissolved oxygen up here, up at the way up in the headwaters, it's fairly high, and it drops through the floor down here, and then it increases as you go down every single one. You don't see the statistical increase here, but if you look at the data tables, it does. The mean does increase, just not in a statistical sense. So you're going from, I don't know, maybe. I'm just throwing numbers out here. You might be around 6, 7 parts per million, but by the time you get down there, it's 10, and it increases. So, go ahead.
Yeah, quick question. The connectivity, we're seeing it all yellow between the first 2 stations. What are we looking for with connectivity? What's the?
It's kind of the, sort of a measure of the ionic strength in there.
Okay, but that could be salt, that could be a lot of.
It could be anything, yes.
Yeah.
It's just sort of a basic chemical parameter, it's just a way of showing that there are differences, and then the detective work is to go back why.
Okay.
It could be a lot of decomposing matter, stuff mineralizing, because you're going through that giant wetland complex, and you see a lot of organic matter by the time you get to the bottom. Okay, Long Lake Creek, again, a lot of differences, because basically where the creek comes out of the lake, you're kind of sampling lake water. It's similar. It did not do a comparison between that station and on the stream and the lake water, but kind of like you saw with Grays Bay, it's the surface water, and it just has to go over a dam. And by the time you get down to this last station, you're seeing the impacts of not only sort of the land use and the impacts on the stream, but perhaps some of the backwater impacts as from Tanager Lake. And there's a fair amount of sort of wetland in that area as well. And finally, Stubbs Bay. This is kind of my favorite when I was here. This sample on Watertown Road, so you come out of Clausen Lake. It's pretty flat until you get here. I can't remember the name of the property there, but it starts shooting down to Watertown Road, and it's pretty dang steep. And then there's Swan Lake, which was excavated a few years ago. But basically, you're seeing quite a difference statistically between all these parameters. So, the decision to alter monitoring is more than just statistics, obviously. And that's why I put the first 2 items ahead of the statistical considerations. Projects in an area TMDLs, regulatory reasons. I mean, just because the statistics showed something doesn't mean you're gonna yank them or keep them. Statistical results will influence your decision, and as I mentioned earlier, your ability to estimate water quality from nearby sampling stations. Like if you dropped a station and a few years later it's like, dang, I wish I knew what that was this next year. That's a strong consideration. So here's kind of my initial recommendations is for the upper stretch of Minnehaha Creek to keep all those stations. Again, the first line is there's few differences statistically between Grays Bay and the actual dam site over the dam, but they're two different systems. And you have the zebra mussel research on the lake. There's just many reasons why not to drop either of those. Site 19, it's sort of really where the lake really, or excuse me, the creek really forms into a creek, and I think that's an important sort of check to what's going on between that station and Station 02. And the last stations in this upper reach, there's long spans. You would have several miles of creek that would not have monitoring, and I don't think that's acceptable. Plus, there's a lot of activity going on here. I think you're doing a lot of work with the cold storage, things like that, and it'd be nice to know if that's working in the future. Now the second, the middle section, again, I mentioned there's a few differences between these sites below the Browndale Dam and sort of around the corner to the Minneapolis border. And it's possible, you might consider dropping one or two of those sites. Now, one reason why you might drop Site 3 is because there's a lot of difficulties in gauging flow down there. It's coming through under 50th, and there's a lot of turbulence in there, a lot of swirling around, whereas Site 4 is a pretty good location for measurement. It's below that influence. Again, I said Site 12 and 15 is really implemented a while ago for more calculations between what's coming out of Edina. And certainly farther down the road, or down the creek, almost to Nokomis, that's Site 24 is a really long creek span from the other locations. So, I wouldn't, these are preliminary, and again, they're just statistical recommendations, dropping one or more of those sites. And here's what I was mentioning earlier. If you want to look back, if you dropped one of those sites, this is the site below Browndale versus the next one downstream, Site 3 versus Site 4, and if you look at all the data points, temperature, dissolved oxygen, conductivity, pH, SRP, TP, the relationship kind of falls apart with suspended sediment, but I bet if you looked a little closer at that and pulled it out by month, rainy years, dry years, etc., you could probably get a better relationship, but in general, you can predict one from the other. And this is the case. If you look in the appendix of the report, in many situations you can do this. Now in the lower section, mentioned Lake Hiawatha really alters the water quality between Site 24 and 18. So, and there's the long span upstream, so I'd recommend keeping 24. There's a few differences very few statistical differences between 18 and 6 down by Lake Hiawatha, or excuse me, Hiawatha Avenue. And, there's really a short span between the stations. There is a USGS gauge at Site 6, which is really important. It's your sort of your best estimate of discharge coming out of the creek. And again, there are strong relationships between those last two stations, and this is a similar picture as I just showed for Sites 3 and 4. Now for Painter Creek, and there's a lot of differences once you go through that wetland. So I'd strongly suggest keeping the upstream site of 3 and then the next one down at Site 4 in the left center of the diagram. But if you recall, there's not many statistical differences except for dissolved oxygen between those lower 4 sites. And it could be arguments why to drop certain stations. Maybe one reason to drop CPO5 is because I established it, because I didn't believe what was going on at Site 1. So, and that is right on the road running into Mound just before. I thought there might be some contribution from that lower central creek, sort of going diagonal from the southwest to the northeast. But as you saw, I haven't been able to pick that up statistically. Long Lake, Clausen Creek, Long Lake Creek, Clausen Creek, again, as I mentioned, they're just two different, just very different locations from one another in each stream. So you're definitely picking up some good information between those two stations. And with that, I can take questions.
I'm a little bit confused. What's your recommendation?
I think the recommendation is dropping some of those sampling sites, primarily those just upstream from Edina on Minnehaha Creek, and then the Browndale Dam site. Dropping the site just past Lake Hiawatha, and then dropping 2 of the sites in lower Painter Creek area. Statistically, I can make those recommendations, but it's up to all interested stakeholders. Like, well, we don't want to drop that because this project's coming up, or there's other good reasons to keep a station or to remove it. So, but statistically, those are my recommendations.
Thank you. So Painter Creek, if we have some work coming up reasonably soon at Painter Creek, is there a reason for us to want to keep all the stations we have? That's more a staff question than yours, I think.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Meehan has his hand up. We need to see if he has the answer.
I would say, it's Lauren's comments, some of the lower reach ones, the majority of your projects you'll be looking at are upstream of there, so making a recommendation of maybe not having all of those, I think is probably something you should think about, given the majority of the projects in Painter Creek are upstream of that location that you'd be looking at.
Which argues for keeping them? No.
No, so if you could go to that.
The lower reach.
Yeah,
Like
if you could go to
Painters.
that one.
Most of the work's
Yeah.
upstream.
Yeah.
Actually, here's Painters.
Yeah, so the majority of the work you'd be looking at would be up in this area, so to detect the differences, keeping that location.
Those last
drained,
3. Yeah.
Those last 3 will all, since they're all similar,
One
you
could
can see similar results.
Gotcha. Thank you. Are there other questions? Manager Miller.
This is way out of my field, so yeah, my ignorance will be pretty obvious pretty quick. Why did we have this study done?
President White, Manager Miller, managers. We had this done because we were kind of trying to see if we could reduce costs and improve efficiencies in our staff time. And we've done many of these sites for many years, and just kind of getting an idea of how similar they were to each other, if there was no significant difference combining one or 2 of them into one main anchor site. So we could focus our attention on those for the next few years. And the ones that we are going to be dropping this next season, we intend to revisit those when we have our 3-year subwatershed rotations. So we're not going to lose them forever. They will come back when that subwatershed is having its 3-year rotation as part of the E-grades program. So.
How much money are we going to be saving by discontinuing sampling at these locations?
We haven't calculated that yet. That's something we can do.
Like more than half your staff could be laid off.
Oh, no.
Transfer the money to.
As I'll show you the sites that we are going to drop this year, I have a couple slides here just to show you which sites we're planning on dropping. It's not many. I mean, his results showed that there are a few here and there that we could drop, but we're not intending to drop a lot of them. So we still have plenty of work for people to do, as well as when the E-grade program gets put into place, we'll be able to have those additional gaps that we need to start monitoring, the macroinvertebrates and the stream health assessments and the other things we're planning to do with the E-grade program, have people fill in with those projects.
Okay, so you'll have more information on it, available on fewer sites. That's more, becoming more helpful to make judgments about the value of the work that we've been doing.
I guess, I'm sorry, could you repeat what you're asking? Or?
You're going to be collecting more information on the, under the E-grade at fewer sites, but it'll be more helpful information.
Well, our plan is to do the 3-year rotation for certain sub-watersheds. So for this, the E-grade program right now, we're focusing on 6 Mile, Schutz, and Minnehaha Creek. And what we're doing is we monitor those intensely with additional sites that we normally don't sample for 3 years. And then after this 3-year period, we're going to be going to the next sub-watersheds and focusing a lot of attention on those. So, but we also are going to be monitoring for additional things other than stream and lake monitoring, which would be wetlands and streams and terrestrial and all the whole well-rounded kind of piece.
I add one more thing. Another reason why it was the study was done, I'm sure you can elaborate better and say it better, but there were some things in the plan several years ago that, I don't know how many years ago, it stated that you will, at one point in time, examine the water quality data. And I can't remember, one had to do with long-term trends, and I can't remember what the other ones were, but it was in I can't remember what policy that was, but it was in there.
We, not too long ago, had this similar parallel study for the lake sampling sites. And some were removed. I don't remember how many. Do you remember?
I don't really know off the top of my head, but we were planning to revisit those as well.
You can save about a half a day. I think on the lake side, you were saving half a day to a day's sampling time on the lake. And in here, you could probably, I don't know, maybe the equivalent.
Yeah.
You know.
Other questions? Andrew, Secretary?
Is this the map of the proposed?
No, this is last year's sampling sites,
Okay.
and this is what we're going down to. So we're only removing 2 sites. We're taking out CMH03, which is right below the dam in Edina, and then 18, which is right after Hiawatha.
So if I could make an argument for 18.
Yes.
If the Park Board and City of Minneapolis partner with us to do some really significant work on the golf course, as well as the lake, and do a lot of remediation work for everything that flows down into Lake Hiawatha. I randomly found a map that the City of Minneapolis did of all the outfalls in the city, and looking at all the outfalls between the lake and Highway 55, it's a line of dots. And those are all the outfalls that are untreated between Hiawatha and Lake Hiawatha and Hiawatha Avenue. If the water currently flowing out of the lake is just so bad, the quality of it is so bad that it's not affected by all these stormwater outfalls. By the time it hits Hiawatha Avenue, removing number 18 is irrelevant because of this. But if instead a lot of the water quality is addressed on the golf course site, that could be an opportunity to identify that.
Sure.
And identify a change, but that might be affected by this string of outfalls that are undistinguishable because they're just that close between the lake and 55.
Would you put 18 back?
Sure.
So 18 and, I can't read it, 6?
6.
Are
The
roughly
last
the
one.
same. So the changes that we might see under your scenario would show up at 6 as well as at 18.
I think he's saying there's a lot of outfalls between 18 and 6.
I wish I could
Yeah,
put this up on the screen,
it's
but
actually 23.
that line of green
Okay.
that's shaped like an M are individual stormwater outfalls that are untreated.
Thank you.
And they're all individual, and they're just, they look like they're stacked one on top of the other.
The main one is at Lindale, it's a 60-inch main.
Sure.
That's
I
pretty
mean,
big.
I lived over there for a bunch of years, and I'll never forget the day I saw a nice clean sheen of everything, of oil right in the middle of the creek, because it was coming out of a pipe right by, what, 30th? I mean, it's a highly urbanized area, and
The other argument is, that's been happening in the last 12, 15 years already, but we didn't detect it. The difference between 18,
yep. And
And six.
I guess my point is, if it's equally bad currently, and nothing has been done to address how bad the water quality is, if we do something that were to address the water quality, having that additional data point at that location could identify what could be done between that location and Highway 55, Minnehaha Avenue, or Hiawatha Avenue. And I'm not a statistician, I'm not an...
I only play one on television.
Yeah.
Mr. Whisker?
It's out of my depth too, but you might pick up, Brian, what you're saying is, if there was a substantial improvement of water quality in Hiawatha, and maybe you want to keep that to detect the improved water quality and what's happening downstream, but you could probably pick that up by in-lake water quality data, for which the park board samples Hiawatha. So I would guess that the outfall of Hiawatha there on 18 is pretty close to the water quality in lake.
Yeah. Yeah.
That would address my issue.
Okay.
I mean, like, just like yeah. I mean, it'd be nice. I think it's important to have a baseline in that lake if there's going to be work done upstream for right there actually to improve the water flowing out of the lake.
Well, Manager Shackleton, the park board does monitor Hiawatha, but these were just some of our thoughts coming into this new season, which will start Monday because the streams are all open. But we don't have to drop it. If it's a concern of you or one of the other board managers, we can still monitor.
I mean, I've really got to believe the data that comes out of the lake and the data that flows out of the lake are almost identical.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and we could also maybe do a statistical analysis comparing Lake Hiawatha's data to that outlet, which is right outside the lake itself. So.
That'd be interesting. Like, I think that analysis would be worthwhile to determine whether or not there's it merits removing or not.
This is like adopted a sampling point data.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, there's going to be a lot of work in that site, and the park board is interested in trying to clean stuff. So.
Manager Blixt.
The other piece that we could just think about doing would be, the work isn't going to be completed for several years, and so we could re-sample in a couple of years. We don't have to do
Add it back in later.
Yeah, we can add it back in the future after the work is done.
Which is why I think that if the data that's on the lake that the park board is collecting can be used instead in lieu of this, that works too.
Yeah, definitely.
One thing I would possibly suggest, throw a wrench in the works, is in lakes you typically do not sample total suspended sediments.
Sure.
But in the creeks you do. But you would probably pick that signal up between 24 and 6 anyway. Because water's slowing down, stuff's dropping out, theoretically. Then it's probably picking back up as turns in more of a creek and you get all these outfalls.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
Just want to show you also Painters Creek, what we're going to do for, so these are all the sites that we monitored in 2015, and we're just going with his recommendation and taking 2 of those off. And like I said before, these will be our long-term anchor sites, so we're going to continue to monitor those to make sure we get those long-term trends, and then revisit those sites that we've dropped when it comes back to their sub-watershed 3-year rotation.
And just to add, I think those are the 3 sites that were sampled long ago when they did the H&H study. These are the anchor sites. These are the 3 anchor sites to develop that the gigantic watershed model. And there are auto samplers on those sites too, aren't there?
One of them.
Other questions for managers? Thank you, Mr. Hatch and Ms. Christensen, I appreciate it. Item 10.2, Resolution 16-018, support to become a 2016 Minnesota Green Corps member host site. Mr. Item.
Thank you, Madam Chair, managers. Staff is asking for board action tonight to execute and sign a resolution of support to be a 2016-2017 Minnesota Green Corps member host site. And also, if MCWD were to be chosen as a host site, we would ask that you also authorize the district administrator to execute and sign a Minnesota Green Corps host site agreement with the MPCA. If you remember, we were a Green Corps member host site for the 2014-2015 service year, where we saw great success and value from hosting that member here. We did apply again last year to be a host site, but we're unsuccessful with that. So looking at being a little more proactive and creating a more fully packaged application, we wanted to have this resolution of support before we submit the application. And then this year we have also put a little bit more time into developing that project for the future service year that member would be doing. So that would include further BMP inspections, expanding to the permitting and planning departments. So beyond just the last cost share BMPs that were inspected, and then trying to build in a little bit more of outreach for the member. So connecting the member, working on connecting our past master water stewards that have been certified through the program with lake associations or communities that are looking to create some education initiatives around water management.
Is there a motion to get this in front of us for action this evening to approve 16-018?
Move approval.
Is there a second?
I
Manager Miller?
just have some question about, we've got a policy that the board has to authorize a request for, funds or participation program and all. And here it says support, where you're actually requesting authorization to apply. Is that correct?
So Manager Miller, managers, the staff was planning to apply with this resolution of support. Yes.
Well, we're authorizing you to apply.
Yes.
I don't want to be too technical, but it's not it's not a subtle difference.
I think in the next be it further resolved statement, it does talk about authorization. That if the MCWD is chosen as a host site, the Board of Managers authorizes the administrator to enter into the agreement.
All right.
I think that's a good distinction. That's
Okay.
Good satisfactory. And Madam Chair,
Yes.
Manager Miller, I'll note also, I think that the resolution was written this way to mimic the model resolution that the MPCA has asked the board to adopt, but the way it's written, I think, covers your base.
That's great. Okay, thank you.
So,
Manager Olson?
so applying does not require board approval.
Yes, it does. It's a board policy that applications for programs or funds have to be authorized by the board.
Okay. I wasn't hearing that in your explanation. Okay. Thank you.
Do we have a policy about applying for grants that says if possible, if time allows,
No.
it'll come to the board or something?
It has to be authorized.
In any event, this is authorization. Any other questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you, Mr. Ryder.
Thank you.
Item 10.3, Ms. Christopher, Resolution 16-019, authorization to contract with Link Associates for comprehensive plan support.
Thank you, Madam Chair, managers. Tonight, staff is requesting authorization to enter into a contract with WENC for comprehensive plan support. And as shown in the proposal in your packet, there are 6 tasks included in the scope. 3 relate to the actual drafting of the plan. And as shown in the graphic and the outline in your packet and discussed previously, we're proposing to have essentially 3 volumes to the plan. One is the executive summary, that's meant to be kind of a high-level, compelling overview of the district's approach. That could really be a standalone document. That really is probably all that policymakers and public would really need look at. The second volume would be all the data, the inventory of land and water resources, all of those things that are required to be in there by statute. And then the third volume would be the implementation plan, where you have more detail on the district's approach and the 11 sub-watershed plans. So under the scope of work, WINC would be, one task would be drafting that data volume and updating everything in there with the new data, new studies, new land use projections. Another task would be drafting the water resources portion of each of the 11 or 10 of the sub-watershed plans. 6 Mile would be done separately. And that includes the condition of the water resources, stressors, issues, goals, management strategies, all framed within the E-grade context. And then a third task related to the drafting of the plan itself would be kind of review and editing as needed for other sections where we may want WENC's expertise. In addition to those tasks, we would also be having them review water quality and quantity trend analyses that would be completed by staff in-house, but we want their kind of another eye on it and make sure everything's been done correctly and meets the requirements of Bowser. And another task would be assisting with quantifying the progress we've made towards the 2007 plan goals, particularly in what we've achieved through our regulatory program. So internally, we're in the process of quantifying reductions through our projects and through LGUs, through what the cities have done. And so the regulations or the rules are really that third leg of the stool that we projected in the 2007 plan for achieving our load reductions. So they'd be helping us crunch the numbers on those. And then the final task is providing a technical report on the model, just so that we make sure we have a good record of changes that have been made to the model over the years. And they'd also be evaluating kind of the strengths and weaknesses of it and providing recommendations for how it should be used moving forward versus other modeling tools. The total, the proposal is $68,840, which is within the budget for the overall comp plan. This year, for the 2016 budget, we included $100,000 for comprehensive plan work. In addition to that, we budgeted $80,000 last year, of which about $45,000 carried over. So we do have about $145,000 total coming into this year. So we are comfortable that we'll have adequate funds left for remaining work that may be needed on the plan. So with that, I am requesting approval tonight, and I will take any questions.
Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 1619?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Calkins, Manager Olson, Manager Miller?
Manager Blix wasn't here when I announced my potential conflict on the Sabre trip to the state auditor. I announced that I'm hiring WINC to do a test of a well that's requested at my house by MPCA, so that I'm paying retail price, and there's I wanted to make sure that it was in the record, but you weren't here, so I want to make sure that you were aware of it.
Thank you, Manager Miller. Any questions of Ms. Christopher? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 10.4, Resolution 16-16, authorization to enter an MOU with the City of St. Louis Park regarding exercise of authority over erosion and sediment control permits. Ms. Sylvia.
Thank you.
President White, managers. Tonight I'm before you with Resolution 16-016 to enter into a memorandum of understanding with the City of St. Louis Park, which grants the city exercise of authority over erosion control permits. The resolution appeared before the board on February 25th as an action item. However, due to some missing information in the board packet, as well as pending edits to the RBA and the resolution, it was tabled to this week. Tonight, I would like to provide a recap of the resolution and provide clarity on the materials that were provided in tonight's packet. I would also like to revisit the request that Manager Blixt made at the last meeting regarding permitting and compliance information for cities that exercise district rule authority. At the end of this discussion, I'll be providing some information on the cities that currently exercise authority and also provide the outline for our process in providing that report. Last year, the city requested to exercise rule authority in an effort to streamline their building permit process. Typically, whenever cities do request rule authority, the district would like to see that the city's own requirements for that rule meet or exceed district rules. It also would like to see that the city has a plan for compliance and enforcement, and that the city has the appropriate staff and resources to administer the rule. In June of 2015, WANC provided an analysis that compared the City of St. Louis Park's erosion control ordinance with the district's rule regarding application submittals, exempted activities, erosion control practices and specifications, and final stabilization methods. WANC found that in order for the city's erosion control ordinance to be as strict as our rule, it would need to include additional information for application submittal criteria, erosion control practice requirements, and final stabilization method requirements. In August of 2015, the city provided their updated ordinance to meet these standards. That documentation is provided as attachment 4. In November, the city also provided a memo outlining its compliance and enforcement plan and documentation of the appropriate staff and resources needed to administer the erosion control rule. This is also provided as attachment 5. With the submission of this material, the city was found to meet our standards as outlined in section 7.1.2 of the district's comprehensive plan. And as such, a memorandum of understanding was drafted and has since been executed by the City of St. Louis Park, which is before you tonight. And staff recommends execution of this memorandum of understanding, granting exercise of erosion control rule authority for the City of St. Louis Park.
Thank you. There's a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Manager Calkins.
Yes.
Questions?
Yes.
Manager Olson?
Time limits, time frame? Didn't see anything in there that, is there a sunset? How do we?
Sure. Once it's signed, it is effective immediately, and so once it's signed, I'll be contacting staff tomorrow to let them know it is executed, and then
it's their right indefinitely? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Or until it's determined that they are not exercising it appropriately. If we find that they aren't meeting our standards, then we have the right to take it back.
Or if they choose. Not to continue.
Yes.
Manager Miller?
The obvious question to the attorney is who decides whether we can pull it back?
There we go. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Manager Miller. First of all, I'll also just note as one additional occasion when it terminates would be when the district completes its revision of its new plan, and then the city is required by Bowser's rules to update their own local plans. That would require them to come back for another regulatory review. As far as whether a city is not performing, that is something that is not well defined. It's left, the authority to make that determination is left with the district, and I believe that the watershed plan includes some language about how the district will proceed to make that determination, correspond with the city, have the city come forward and review the issues and so forth. I think I'm not aware of any precedent for that process going to a point where it became a legal question of did the district have the right to take back regulatory authority.
Thank you. Any other questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, and thank you for the very nice complete record there.
Yes. Also, I'd like to touch on Manager Blick's request from last time we spoke. So Manager Blix requested a report that would provide a summary of permitting activity and compliance of the cities that do exercise the district's rural authority. Currently, there are 12 municipalities that exercise the authority on behalf of the district. I'm going to have a table coming around that kind of summarizes which cities that is and the rules that they administer. And so these cities, through exercising our authority, they are obligated to report on the implementation of these rules that they have authority over. However, not every community follows through on this obligation, and so we are currently working with those communities in order to fill the gaps that we have in our data on the compliance. And once that is compiled, we'll be able to provide that requested report. So if there's any questions.
Manager Blixt?
But since we're working in partnership, maybe we can incentivize them in some way by providing some financial support for them to get their work done.
Manager
Yeah.
Miller?
I wouldn't support that. All these cities have stormwater utilities with great revenue sources, and they should be using those sources of revenues to do their water quality work.
Yes, but that would mean that we would have to exercise some sort of regulatory control instead of reaching out to them to offer help and support to do their work.
Well, if they can't do the work, they should turn the authority back to us.
Well, but I thought our approach was supposed to be in partnership with them.
I think you're got a little word game going here, but
Well, I mean, there must be a reason that they're not getting the work done, and I don't know, maybe if we tried to help them to get it done, maybe they would be able to perform.
Mr. Whisker?
Manager Blix, managers, President White. I don't think Catherine's saying that the work isn't being done. The issue is when we delegate regulatory authority to communities, they're the ones issuing permits and tracking which permits they've issued, at what point in time, and what compliance issues they have, et cetera, et cetera. And in the memorandum of understanding that's executed when that authority transfers to the community, there's a sentence that says, "Thou shalt provide an annual report." And anybody that's been involved in annual reporting and the number and volume of annual reports knows that they don't always get filed on time. And so in the range of initiatives the permitting department has to do, one of the things that doesn't always happen right on time because of resources that we have available and the priority decisions we have to make is making sure on December 31st each community submits a report of all the building permits that it has issued that year and then compiling those against the permit reports we have. So what Catherine's saying is there are some data gaps. We're speaking with the communities at the staff level to say, could you give us those reports? And that we'll aggregate that data and bring it back and make a presentation to you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Manager
Quick
Paulson?
one. I noticed Richfield here, across the board, they do everything.
Not quite everything. These are just the rules that are exercised, but we still retain.
Yeah, there's several other, like shoreline regulation, dredging, that are delegated to the watershed district under general permit authority from the DNR that aren't listed here. This is just a list of the regulations that cities have received authority for.
And they chose to take over those responsibilities?
For why? Some of these decisions were made quite some time ago, so we don't know the exact rationale. Most of the time, they're communities that have water resource staff or public works staff or engineering services. And for Richfield, for example, when we went through previous rule writing for people that were around back then, There's just a general desire in some of these communities to have that level of local control. It's sort of the same direction that we're going with the Corps of Engineers. They want to streamline permitting and be able to make some of those decisions locally. And I think that's what's driven a lot of this, is they have the capacity and they want that level of local streamlined control. I think that's what's driven pretty much all of them.
So can I assume the other 16 cities are all blank?
Correct.
Thank you.
And I do think that moving forward through the comprehensive plan, we'll be discussing this next week as just a preview. One of the sections of our comprehensive plan are local government unit requirements, and our last plan described the role of local government units in a certain way with regards to their load allocations. I think this is a good policy topic in terms of what's the district's posture vis-a-vis municipalities exerting regulatory authority. Maybe on the surface you may initially be concerned with how are they administering those rules, what level of compliance are they providing, what's the reporting back so that we can track water quality metrics as they're applied to the local scale. But I think beyond that, one of the things that we've started to think about since Manager Blix brought this up is if we start to divest watershed authority locally, but we're using the permitting department as a clearinghouse for land use change and project partnership opportunities, we really need to think about how we maintain strong connections with the communities that have that level of local control and are issuing those permits. So I think there's probably some good discussion to have about just the whole framework and how we want it to work moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Manager Flex?
I don't see Greenwood on here, and I know that there, in the past, we had some discussions about Greenwood and its ability to actually issue WACA permits, and because they don't really had any staff, and they were just using some antique maps in order to do the permitting.
Yeah, it's not my understanding that Greenwood exerts Wetland Conservation Act authority, but that's something we can triple check.
Yeah, that's just my recollection. So.
Okay.
And that actually is a concern for, some of the other cities as well, is that in the past at least we had very long discussions about some of the cities' actually ability to actually do the permitting because they just didn't have the staff available to do it.
Right, and I think on the front end, Manager Blix and managers, cities are required to demonstrate that they meet those minimum test requirements. Do you have the staff? Do you have the technical capabilities? Do you have the right ordinance in place? But then there is the question of follow through and implementation, and those are good discussions to have as a policy board in terms of our how you want to prioritize the use of your permitting department too, because we have limited resources, and how much time do you want to spend auditing and following up with communities versus issuing permits versus field compliance with the resources that you do have available. And I think there are several layers of accountability, and I'm not saying that it's perfect or some of these communities are doing a perfect job, but those are questions that could be asked and answered through the comprehensive plan, and that local government unit framework is what do you want the district's role to be in terms of monitoring once communities have that level of authority. Is it just a reporting requirement, or is it something more robust?
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 10.5, Resolution 1620, authorization to submit a partnership proposal with Great River Greening. Ms. Shaw.
Madam Chair, managers, tonight I am seeking authorization to submit a partnership proposal with Great River Greening. As Manager Miller noted earlier, the board has requested that they be notified when staff is seeking grant funding. So tonight I am asking for that authorization. If you remember, the board entered into a memorandum of understanding with Great River Greening in 2015, and in March of 2015, in February of 2015, the board authorized staff to submit for grants. So I wanted to provide a brief summary of what the results of those grants were before I dive into the request for tonight. So we received a total of $186,100 between the LCCMR and the Outdoor Heritage Fund. So we got a pretty good chunk of money for the Minnehaha Creek Greenway, so that's to do continue enhancements along there. A lot of that money was going towards buckthorn removal and enhancements of the woodlands along the stream. And then the Gould, Chute, Rye, Walderas, Barkus properties is just general restoration, so trying to get rid of invasive species and then restore the native habitat. So if everything goes as planned and the legislature does approve the funding, we will be awarded this money in July 1st of this year, and then staff will come back to the board for authorization to enter into those agreements with Great River Greening to expend those funds. So
You paused, I thought you were done, you're not, go ahead.
So tonight, staff has looked at an opportunity with Great River Greening to do a little bit more research-oriented grant request. So the project purpose that is before you tonight is we're looking to investigate the role of haying on a grassland. So looking to remove the nitrogen that plants produce once they decompose, remove that from a site, and then I'd look to see how that affects plant diversity and pollinators. So looking at the 6 Mile Marsh Prairie Restoration Site, obviously that provides a huge compass or area to do such a plan. So that is what we're looking at for doing this research. So we're looking to apply for a $105,000 grant, of which the district would contribute $25,000. So I'm just going to go into a very brief details of the project because it's just a general proposal, but here's the general project design approach. So they're breaking up the site into 16 plots. 8 of the plots will be treatment, 8 will have control. They'll do pre-treatment data, so collecting soil nitrogen, vegetation data, and pollinator data. Then once that's collected, we will overseed, which is the orange hashed areas, with a diversity booster mix. And the purpose of this is twofold. One is to test the impacts of multiple seedings to promote higher diversity. So is continuing to seed areas actually successful in producing higher diversity in plantings? And then also to test the capacity of haying to facilitate the recruitment of cool season short stature species. So the purpose of that is those species are critical for cool season pollinators, which there aren't a lot of those species out there right now. So to see if we can actually help the cool season pollinators have some extra habitat. We would hay once a year between the summer of 2017 to the summer of 2020. We would then do post-treatment data collection in 2020, and then Great River Greening would analyze and develop a report for dissemination, not not decimation, as I noted in the RBA. So this is, like I said, a very general approach to what would be done. So why would we do this? Generally, it's assumed that if you reduce soil nitrogen, you're going to increase vegetation diversity, which then increases pollinator diversity, which is a pretty big thing right now in the state. The big thing from my perspective in managing all of our land, it could be a very useful sustainable management tool. So what does that mean? Saving us money. Right now at this site, it's costing about $20,000 a year to manage the vegetation. So just if we get this grant, just in those 4 years, you'll save $60,000. And if the haying proves successful, then essentially if you can find a farmer to help do the haying, then you could essentially save around that money each year. So it's a very low cost to the district and can be a sustainable tool for us and also for local communities. Another big thing right now, especially with the park board, is the management tool that helps to reduce herbicide use. So if we can have other tools in our toolbox other than going to herbicide, then that's a win-win for everybody. And being a leader, a state leader, Bowser's supporting this. They'd like to do more research like this to see if they can, in fact, partner with other farmers across the state to help them maintain their existing easements that they have specifically for grassland management. And lastly, a little piece is supporting local farmers. So if you can find people that need hay for their animals or for general things, then we can provide that resource to them. So ultimately, we hope to increase plant and pollinator diversity while developing a sustainable management tool for the district that also helps support state guidelines for grassland management. So with that, I can take any questions, but again, I am asking for authorization tonight to submit a partnership proposal with Great River Greening.
Before I take your question, Manager Olson, is there a motion to get this before us?
Move approval.
Is there a second? Thank you, Manager Olson.
How far do we reach, this question might be for Manager Calkins, how far do we reach with haying into the soil? We have nitrogen as a problem going into wells and things like that, especially in parts of the state where there's a lot of agriculture, but is this a deep reach, or is this just the top 4 inches, or how effective is this?
Manager, also managers. So in this proposal, we're proposing to go no more than 3 inches. So leave the top kind of root structure of the plant intact. So the maximum, so 3 inches from the top of the ground would be the maximum you would go.
Okay. But the damage we are living with right now goes deeper than 3 inches.
I'm sorry, I thought you were asking what we would actually remove.
Okay, so what we're saying is we're going to take the top burden off. What's there is already deep, but we're not going to add to it. Or we're going to try to.
Yeah, Manager Olson, the whole point is, to try to stop contributing to the nitrogen. Out here, we'll have to do the soil test to actually see what the levels are out there.
Okay.
Maybe there's not a problem, but be curious to see what they are and if we can reduce whatever is out there.
Manager Calkins?
That's where my question would have gone is, do you know there's a problem with nitrogen now?
Yeah, Manager Calkins, I don't currently. I was relying on Great River Greening staff and their research and of these areas and what had previously had been a cropland to a prairie.
But I mean, that to me is a base question before you did anything, number one. Number two, nitrogen is highly mobile, so it's lost from the system very quickly, which is why it's the limiting nutrient in terrestrial systems. So unless you're adding nitrogen in to maintain the grassland, which is not happening as I understand it, you're going to lose nitrogen over time. You're certainly going to cycle some of that with a crop that's growing there, or with plants that are growing there. With phosphorus, prairie species actually mine phosphorus and deposit it on the surface. So you tend to get a buildup of phosphorus, but with nitrogen, that's pretty limited because it's so mobile. So I think it would be very important to know if indeed there is a problem in the first place, and specifically to the site that you're working on.
Mr. Whisker?
Chair White, managers, I'm just going to reflect on what Tiffany told me before the meeting, which was, I think first and foremost, this is a Great River Greening proposal. And so the Great River Greening approached the district and said, we would love to partner with you on your land to conduct this research for our objectives. And so in terms of the spirit of the partnership, it's really coming from their perspective rather than the district wanting to conduct this basic research. And part of our global partnership memorandum of understanding with Great River Greening, there was an outline of potential quid pro quos. One of the reasons we wanted to partner with them was to access LCCMR or Sam's Lessard funding, and they've been pretty successful in that this first round, and we'll be looking at doing that again moving forward. So this is one of those elements of quid pro quo. When they originally approached us, what I understood was that in a historical prairie scenario, you're going to have grazing, and so the grazing creates biodiversity because the animals eat the plants, they defecate, and it creates a distinct pattern of grazing and nutrient cycling that could potentially promote a level of biodiversity. That's different from how we currently manage the prairie land, which is to use herbicides and spot spray. And so the very initial question was, would we entertain sort of paddocks out here and grazing? And based on the proposed use of the site and the plans that the board's already approved in terms of public access and thing, our initial reaction to that was that probably isn't super compatible. And so they'd made a haying proposal. And so I don't know all of the science behind it. I don't know that it's strictly restricted to just nitrogen and nitrogen cycling. They're looking at mimicking grazing patterns to see if that type of management may promote higher levels of biodiversity and support pollinators and those sorts of things. Maybe the nitrogen is one component of their ultimate research goals. So I just wanted to add a little bit of extra context.
And I think that's the reason for the 16 different plots where they're going to treat those differently to kind of control the variables to look for differences. So even if nitrogen's not an issue to start with, they can kind of look at that as a variable between the different types of plots that are being treated.
And I'll note this was a request that did come quite late. I had that conversation with Tiffany from Great River Greening. I think the deadline's pending, which is why it's come quickly before you. And so we could circle back with the details of the proposal that they want to make once we have that from them, if you chose to advance.
And as you indicated, Bowser has interest in this as well.
Yeah, Bowser and Great River Greening have been working on what they call a working lands initiative. So they're trying to figure out when you have large plots of land that you're trying to maintain in somewhat of a native, natural state, can you do something like this? So take a local farmer, utilize their resource to help you maintain your resource. So this would be somewhat of a pilot for that initiative to move forward across the state.
Thank you. Manager Calkins?
And I don't want to insinuate that I'm questioning whether what they're doing is a good idea or not. It may be. They're not mimicking grazing by any standard, by what's proposed here. There's some really neat research coming out of Africa right now relative to grazing and the effects of grazing, which might be applicable here. But I just think that it's very important, even if it's somebody else's project, if the district's going to be involved, I think it's very important that the district understand what are the goals, what are the current conditions, what are they looking for, because the spending of all of these grant dollars, regardless of who's getting them, needs to be done wisely. So just because it happens to be a partner that's interested in something doesn't mean that the district needs to just go along for that reason. I think this district still needs to have some answers to some of those basic questions.
Do you want to address the timeline? Because I agree, and those are some of the conversations that we had. And we felt with the information we had, we owed it to Great River Greening to at least kind of present the proposal to the board to have that conversation so that it wasn't staff just saying no. But those are the questions and conversations that Tiffany and I had. So I don't know if you want to address the timeline and what information we might be able to gather before their deadline.
Well, the deadline to submit to actually have the LCCMR review it is tomorrow for Great River Greening.
And when did we find out that they wanted to do this?
They approached us for the haying a couple of weeks ago with the proposal. We reviewed it internally, for grazing, we said that's not going to work. And we got this proposal last week.
And then it'd be a preliminary application for LCCMR review.
Yeah, but I think March 21st is the drop dead deadline to apply, but if you want to have LCCMR staff review and give you comments on the proposal, that's what Great River Greening was hoping to submit by tomorrow.
So I'll ask the kinds of questions, some doctor prescribes a pill. What does it do for you? How does it hurt you? What happens if you don't take it, So are there any harms that would come to us by doing this?
I don't see any harms in doing it. We're basically, how we're managing it right now, as James said, it's spot spraying, it's spot mowing, occasionally, doing a burn. So in this case, the grant funding is actually giving us some monies to keep doing things like that. So making sure the periphery areas that aren't in a full grassland are still being maintained. So you're basically getting monies to maintain for 4 years. So that's saving us money. Plus, you're going to seed a bunch of areas, hopefully to increase the diversity out there. And hopefully, if the nitrogen thing isn't a factor, that's not the only thing you're researching. It's the diversity of the plant species and the diversity of the pollinators species as well. So I think those are all beneficial things, and if you can support the local economy while doing it, and find a partnership in that way, as I said, if it's something that is proven successful and sustainable, then ultimately it just brings cost savings to the maintenance department moving forward.
Thank you. Manager Calkins?
I don't want to discuss the whole way an experiment is being designed, but it's also a site that's been disturbed historically. But there is the potential for harm in that compaction is going to be an issue. If they're mowing, they're taking equipment over the property, they're compacting. That may have a bigger effect on diversity than what they're looking at. And they're not measuring for that. So I think, again, it's a complex system that you're working with, and you have to make sure that it's going to answer the questions that you're looking to get answers to. And as I say, I don't have enough information to answer that, but I think it is important to think about that. And I would say that compaction has the potential to play a bigger role here than the nitrogen does.
Manager Calkins, managers, that is something I asked as well. That was, how many times are you going to be mowing out there? So that was, the answer to that was once a year. And if I look at how many times our current contractors out there mowing, it's not, obviously they're not mowing the whole area at one time, but they're out there 4 or 5 times a year mowing certain, pockets areas. So I don't know if you can equate those to being the same, but they are, we're already mowing out there, having impacts in that way.
The activity would stop.
Yes.
So it'd be a trade-off.
The current activity of 4 times a year would stop for the haying once a year.
Yeah, but again, it's complicated. It has to do with when they mow it and what the soil moisture is and all those kinds of things. Because you could ruin the whole place in one day if it's done at the wrong time.
Yep.
And how Great River Greening explained that is they write very specific specifications. So the mowing has to be done in certain standards. It has to be taken off the field within 48 hours. So there's very precise ways you can try to mitigate those concerns and those risks.
Manager Shackleton, then Mr. Whisker, then Manager Miller.
Could you go back to the map of the site? And in the process of that, what's the timeline for putting in public access? And how does that overlap with this?
Manager Shackleton, managers, we're looking at putting in public access this year. So this would be 2016. This won't be implemented till the summer of 2017.
Okay. Thank you. I'm excited to take advantage of that public access. So the Working Lands Initiative is an attempt by DNR and Bowser and...
It's Great River Greening and Bowser. So Great River Greening is approaching Bowser to see if they're kind of framing it in the right way so it'll be useful for grants. So if it's Bowser grants or Outdoor Heritage Fund grants.
Okay. I've heard of this initiative in the past, and so the little bit I've known about it, I knew about it before tonight, involved taking land that's in production in western and southern Minnesota and trying to find a way to use the land differently. And considering this is a heavily impacted site and the history of what this site looked like 5 years ago and how it was being used 5 years ago, I think there's a value, irrespective of some of the short-term consequences of sending machinery across here to do this kind of basic research.
Compaction is not short-term. You're talking hundreds of years of damage, which a lot has already been done on this site.
Yeah,
so
but the conversation here was, sending a tractor across here. While there certainly would be a short-term effect to that, I think it's minimal compared to what happened in the previous 150 years on this site. And if this is going to be will help provide some fundamental research that can be useful elsewhere in the state, I think it's an appropriate use of public land.
Mr. Whisker.
I would just remind the board, President White, managers, that I get, from my perspective, the principal issue here is staff brought this proposal on behalf of Great River Greening so you could hear it, knowing that we don't have the answers to all of the questions that you might ask. We didn't have all the answers to the questions we wanted to ask. and it was on their very short turnaround timeline. So I guess the question is, what would you like to do with that, knowing that we can't answer all these questions? We just don't have that information, and that tomorrow's the deadline for a pre-proposal. So I don't know if there's comfort in a conditioned approval to advance a pre-proposal saying we need the detail, or if there's just not a comfort in doing that because you're going too far into the grant realm and implicitly making sort of a guarantee that you're going to advance. So
Thank you. Manager Miller?
I'm conflicted as heck here. Jim isn't comfortable as a scientist.
I'm not saying that. I mean, I want
At
to be
least
careful
I get
there.
the impression.
And I don't know, maybe that's a question, is what the process is, because you can certainly turn it down, even if you're given the grant. That
Right.
gives you a longer window of time, so you can say, we've decided that we're not in favor, but is that our decision to make? That would be the question there. But again, I don't have enough information about the specifics to say it's good or bad. I think their goals are great. But it is district land, and we're trying to restore a piece of property for the district's reasons, and so I think we have to be protective of that. So if there's an opportunity to say, yeah, you know, we need more information, but we're okay with applying for the grant, but then if when it comes at the actual time to do it, you say, well, we're really not so sure if we want to do that. I don't know if that's still an option.
Mr. Erdl?
Well, I'm not done yet.
Oh, Manager Miller?
Thank you. I always think it's bad policy to rush decisions because there's money available, because that's not a good way of making decisions. I'm not blaming the staff for this, because you know, you had nothing to do with the time frame here, and I think you've given us enough information, as much information as you had. But we all remember, you know, 4 or 5 years ago, we were rushed to buy some seed for the same site, and because we were going to lose the opportunity to, I don't know, the Russians were coming or something. It was very confusing with the reason we needed to buy the seed so quickly, but we didn't do it. I just don't feel comfortable, especially if there's basic scientific questions that you think should be answered, and you know, people should have more respect for our staff and board, not to rush us into these decisions because there's money available.
I want to be clear, I don't think that, I mean, they don't know exactly what our process is, that we have a standing policy to bring grant requests to the board and that kind of thing. I think Great River Greening's been a pretty good partner. This is just something that they wanted to do, that they advanced to us, and we brought before you.
And I think a lot of their partners kind of in the nonprofit world don't operate kind of with the same level of scrutiny and kind of the more rigid board processes that this board has. So they're probably used to getting and working with people on a quicker turnaround. So that's maybe part of the learning that they need to do also to partner with us in the future, is to kind of give us more advanced lead time and time for back and forth to get questions like that answered.
Well, it's not that a process is overburdening. I think it's a logical process. I know you're not implying that, but our partners should understand that, you know, we're fiduciaries, you know, and if we seek these funds, we've got to make sure that their public funds are properly used. And, I haven't got that level of comfort.
I would suggest there might be an opportunity to kind of follow Manager Culkin's recommendation or thoughts, maybe not a recommendation, but your thoughts, that we could give approval to proceed with this preliminary grant proposal, and then at some point maybe have the full proposal before us for review or even for presentation, and then have that be contingent on that kind of final approval before it's submitted and reviewed by the Sarge Sam's Outdoor Heritage Council. Because I think all your concerns about spending public dollars, it doesn't matter if it's going to us or others, we do have a responsibility to kind of be safe, to safeguard public funds, and that's an important part of what we are and how we do business. So that's not something we want to compromise And if, after hearing and having their ecologists or their scientific staff be able to answer Manager Culkin's questions and refer to those. I think they have done some of this process in other properties with kind of haying and looking at some things, and I know they've done a lot of work with goats and removing buckthorn and all those different types of things that that Great River Greening has been participating in. So they have kind of the ecologists on staff that are doing some of that work too.
Thank you. Manager Shepherd?
Can you go over the timeline again? So this is a pre-proposal.
Yep, so pre-proposals are due tomorrow, so March 11th, and then I believe March 21st is when proposals are due. So I don't think that gives us time before the next board meeting, but what we could do is we could have Steve come to the board meeting that, I think it's the 24th, and then if the board isn't comfortable, then we could just withdraw our application.
The pre-proposal will be a placeholder for Lessard Sam's staff, correct?
Yes, so
And then-
it's an opportunity to actually help them.
Get feedback from the staff.
Okay. And then on the 21st, they would expect an actual proposal.
Correct.
I'd be concerned of communication to the council, Lessard Sam's council, that we're applying, and then later on find out that we've withdrawn our application. Like, I think I like the idea of kind of tearing it out and to protect ourselves, but I'd be concerned of submitting something and then the message it sends of submitting and then withdrawing. I'm also not as concerned about this and I think that I mean, if you Google, it's a good way of doing it, the Working Lands Initiative, it goes back 6-7 years. This is not something new that the state has been doing, and it is an attempt to do something larger for the greater good. So I'm willing to support this.
Manager Miller?
No, thanks.
Ms. Shopler, I just want clarification. You talked about crews going out several times a year, but they're not doing the whole site 4 times a year.
Correct. That's what I said, is that they're
a piece
doing
here and a piece there.
pockets here, piece in there.
So this would be no more, not much more than is happening right now in terms of driving vehicles over the property.
I would say that's pretty safe to say, because even if you're not doing mowing, they're driving vehicles all over the site to spray. And that's more active than the mowing piece.
I too be willing to support it. Let's make it a motion, and then I'll call on Manager Calkins. Do you want to make a motion?
There was a motion.
There was? I'm sorry, I apologize. I was ahead of myself. Manager Calkins.
I guess that just brings up another point, is that if the district is driving all over the site to spray, and I don't know what they're driving over the site with, that could be potentially problematic. And I'm fully aware that people like to use machines to do things rather than doing it in other ways, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's a good idea. So that maybe is something that should be evaluated as well.
Is there any other comment, or are we ready to vote? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No. We should be recorded. We should be recorded as voting then.
Okay, is there no vote for Manager Miller? Thank you very much. Item 10.6 is the minutes of the February 11th meeting. I don't know if your comments made the way down the line, so Manager Calkins, if you could say what amendments you had wanted to, what changes you'd want to see in that set of minutes.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Holtman.
if you're agreeable, I'm happy to advance the matter.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Do the managers have a copy of the minutes with the revisions?
No.
At this time?
We haven't seen them.
Madam Chair and board members, this just concerns proposed adoption of revised minutes from February 11th. The the minutes were already approved on your consent agenda last meeting, but Manager Calkins had communicated some requested revisions to us, and we didn't bring those forward at the February 25th meeting. And I'll go through them. I apologize, I'm not sure why, but when I printed out those copies, the highlighting of the changes just didn't come out in most places, but I can talk through them. And if you're inclined to adopt the revised minutes, I would suggest, not to get into parliamentary details, instead of the motion for reconsideration process, I would suggest that there just be a motion to adopt the revised minutes and replace the existing minutes. So then, if I may, I'll just quickly go through and point out the changes. On page 1, lines 37 to 39, there's just supplementary text. It previously said Manager Calkins noted that he reviewed the report and had no questions for staff. It would be expanded to say Manager Miller specifically asked Manager Calkins if he was satisfied with the report, and Manager Calkins noted that he had reviewed the report and had no questions for staff. Line 69, the words final action would replace the word discussion. Information prior to final action by the managers. On page 3, the top 4 lines, as approved, the minutes end with coordinating efforts with 9 Mile Creek and Bassett Creek watershed organizations. The revisions would add, as all 3 of these streams cross Highway 169 within this section of the Highway 169 corridor, and along with the number of wetlands would be affected by this future project. Page 5, line 198, 199, just very small adjustments to the syntax and typos. A typo capitalizing section 206, projects that the Corps is interested in, adding the word in. Page 7, 278 through 280. Just adjustments in the numerical representations, 0.7 and 0.35, and then changing what read, taking a comprehensive approach with the pilot and includes canoes and kayaks would now read a comprehensive approach with the pilot and therefore not exempting canoes and kayaks. And I believe that is all of the changes.
I got one question. I don't have on line 254, it says Manager Miller said that he would very much like to see a resolution of support from Three Rivers Park District. That doesn't sound like something I'd say. I think I think I said we require a resolution of support from Three Rivers Park District.
That sounds like something.
It wasn't conditional?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
It wasn't a wish.
Yeah.
It was a demand, as I recall.
you, that sounds appropriate.
Fortuitously, though, these have been approved, you can now make that change. So if you want to add that.
Yep, I so move.
Okay.
I was trying to figure out why I couldn't remember any of this. I wasn't at this meeting.
That's right.
Oh, very strange to me.
And yet Manager Miller's amendment seems.
That does.
Do you have a motion for approval?
Of everything? Yeah.
Second.
Motion and second. One moment, please. We can't vote. There we go. There's a motion and a second. Any questions? That would be a motion to make the changes requested by Manager Calkins and replace these minutes. For these minutes, replace, as adopted, replace the previous accepted minutes. Something like that. 5 of you may vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. And we're on to 11.1, Mr. Erdahl, budget discussions.
Thank you, President White and managers. I just wanted to give a few kind of slides. There's not this is not a content-rich presentation, more of just kind of to start the discussion going forward. I think last year when we went through the budget, I think one of the first times I gave a similar presentation was in June. So we're trying to get a little bit of a head start in looking at next year's budget and the work plan process to kind of cue things up a little bit earlier. So the things I'll talk about, and I provided handouts for you with the same slideshow here, to talk about the timeline and process, the specific date, deadlines, and targets, opportunities for public comment. We've talked quite a bit in recent meetings about using the strategic framework as a way to kind of evaluate and measure things that we're looking at in terms of the budget and the work plan. So this is a year to pilot use of that. Then also to define guiding principles, things like our operating and capital budgets. We've talked at some times about are we if we should divide operating and capital budgets out, so we kind of look at the X dollars for operating budget and X dollars for capital, and how that might change how we do some of our planning and financing and some other things. So these are some opportunities for you folks to discuss some policy level questions about budget. Looking at the budget in context of both the past and future years, and then looking at significant initiatives that would be coming up in 2017. And all of this is really to kind of to pre-cue some of the discussion and the dialogue that hopefully we'll be able to have at the April 7th board retreat, when we kind of go into this in more depth. So this is kind of a bit of a preview or pre-cueing for that process. So just looking at the timeline, some of the dates and the spans of time, I've put together kind of a tentative schedule. This isn't necessarily written in stone. I'm pretty confident that some of the deadline dates are some of the targets we need to hit. Things like the September 15th certification of the preliminary levy, and then also we have to have another public comment period in the month of December. We're thinking of doing a similar process to what we did last year in terms of putting together a package of the entire organization's budget and process, and going through a series of either whether you want to do that as a joint committee meetings like we did this past summer, or if you want to kind of form kind of a board workshop. I think either way, I think it's most useful when that has all managers involved in that process, so that everyone can be kind of aware of what's going on and kind of see the progression as we go from the early preliminary budgets through to the final budget that would be approved. So this kind of goes through some of the highlights looking forward at the starting now and going through the end of the year. In terms of some of the questions and ideas that we can discuss in terms of our organization's budget philosophy, and this is, I think, one of the areas where we really look to the Board of Managers and your role to help us define these things more than anything else. It's a pretty critical element, obviously, in terms of what we do as an organization. But to look at the impact of our programs and the activities that we do, to look at the work plans in each area, to kind of put them in the context of what has happened in the past, and kind of looking forward as best we can, looking at some of the capital improvement plans going forward and some of those things, how we carry forward or carry over monies to reduce levy or expand program opportunities. And then kind of using all of that to help develop the target levy and budget points for the year going forward. And also we've kind of initiated over the past year on a couple different occasions the notion of using financing to kind of augment and kind of make some of our long-term projects in focal geographies more predictable, in terms of, instead of having spikes in the levy, to kind of increase predictability with avoiding some of the kind of ups and downs in the needs for levy?
I think it's careful. I mean, we got to be careful with the language we use here. We're not doing that for levy purposes. We're doing that recognizing the permanent nature of the expenditures, which would be a
Right.
capital expenditure, and therefore an eligibility for
Right.
for a financing. Otherwise, it's not eligible for financing if it isn't a capital
Right.
program.
Good point, good distinction. And I know we've had some discussion here, there's both different levels to kind of figure out what the net capacity would be for those programs or projects, and also what the kind of comfort level with the Board of Managers is for that. I think those are sometimes two different questions. So kind of looking at the past decade, since 2006 through 2016, which is actually, I guess, 11 years, and this is a slide that was presented as part of the budget discussion this past October, actually, we talked about this one. So just kind of looking at some of the changes, and maybe especially at the levy and budget changes, to see kind of how that has kind of changed over time, based on kind of available resources and available carry forward. And then kind of at the bottom, this is something that has kind of no specificity yet at all in terms of our actual programs and projects, but this is again something that was discussed when asked to kind of project forward another year in this past year's budget development process at a potential target or direction. And these numbers were put into a graph that kind of charted that also, and looked at kind of at first for the last 5 to 6 years, kind of a diverging path with levy and budget, and then with a reduced amount of carry forward available, because we're getting to be kind of more successful at seeing programs from start through completion, a reducing amount of that to kind of bring those numbers together with a reducing amount of carry forward.
There'd be another point that we need clarity for policy making, and that is in addition to the carry forward, there would be grants and capital funds.
Right.
So I think when we describe this from now on, I think we should
all sources of revenue.
Yeah, right. Because I know your staff is doing a big job of trying to identify other sources of funds, and that we shouldn't presume that it's going to be from reserves, but other partners that.
Right, and some of those we can anticipate, and for instance, like the Great River Greening opportunity, whether that happens this year or not, that's kind of, some of those things are something that come along, and whether that is a budget relief going forward or not, and all those types of things will kind of come into play in terms of how we put that formula together. So it's not just the carry forward, it's also external sources of revenue, whether they're grants or appropriations or other things. And then the final document will be something like we had for this past year for the 2016 budget, and I apologize, it kind of showed up a little bit blurry from the document I copied this from, but it's just kind of looking at our overall program. We had kind of initial preliminary budget, we made some adjustments in consultation and with your direction, and then we came up with the final budget. So I don't know if you have any questions at this point. This is really, like I said, more to kind of queue up this budget discussion for April 7th and beyond. One of the things is that I think that we have some pretty big projects on the docket that we'll give you more information about, and the sooner we kind of get your feedback and information about some of those priorities, the better in terms of putting together work plans and the budget numbers.
Manager Olson.
A question for Manager Miller. When we have grant money come in, when the grant money comes in and we do those projects actually weren't part of this budget procedure, correct?
That's correct.
Okay,
because we didn't know whether we had them or not.
So how do we show that? Do we show those as possibilities, provided we get the
identified or unidentified sources of additional funds? So it'd be a contingency in terms of the revenue, and so therefore it'd be contingency in terms of the expenditure.
Okay.
Manager Blixt.
I just need these two last columns explained to me. Because one is budget levy and the other one is levy budget. So, what do they mean?
That represents kind of the budget levy is the difference between the two, between the levy and the budget.
The difference.
Yes, and the last column is the ratio of the levy to the budget.
It's budget minus levy. Not budget
Is
levy.
that what it is?
Yeah.
It's budget minus levy.
It's even indicated on the top there.
I know it says.
Yeah, it's
but I thought-
that's not a hyphen, it's a minus sign, yeah,
Minus.
correct, correct. Right.
I'm like, okay.
Good question.
I'm like, huh, what is,
And then
okay.
the other's a ratio.
And the other is the ratio. All right, thank you. I was like, okay.
Other questions?
Thank you.
Yeah, nice view.
Should we go straight into the administrator's report? Is that where we are? Yes.
So I'll do that maybe from here too, since I don't move chairs. I have a few things. One is that Tally Mamayak sent out an email yesterday with some recent media coverage for the district, and one of the online version of the Minnesota Business Monthly wasn't quite as good as the in-paper copy, but it's I think that this is an opportunity, and we've had kind of discussions with most of you about trying to get our word out about the types of work we're doing and our approach to our work in a way that serves the public interest and the private interest in the communities we serve. We're trying to get that out not just to our communities we talk to on a regular basis, but also to new and different audiences. So getting into the Minnesota Business Monthly is a nice way to kind of reach out beyond our kind of typical standard audiences. So I know Telly did a lot of work to kind of get that placement in this issue, so that doesn't happen by chance. So I wanted to point that out. Also, I sent an email about the upcoming board retreat a couple days ago, or maybe that was yesterday, in fact. And just I want to make sure that all of you have an opportunity to provide input into the potential agenda, and then any input I receive, I'll discuss that with President White, and she'll kind of define the final agenda for that meeting and go forward. The current plan is to have that in this room, probably set up in a little bit less formal way, and have that to be from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. on Thursday, April 7th. Also, we had one of our staff had received an announcement about the upcoming Hennepin County State of the County address, and I didn't know if that would be of interest, or you all got that, so that's coming up on April 19th. We already kind of mentioned a little bit about the 6 Mile Creek planning meetings with the community members. Thanks very much to managers White and Olson for participating in those. That was a nice help to have your presence and as part of that. That makes a big difference with our community partners. We had the last two this week with Three Rivers Park District, and then with Commissioner Jeff Johnson this morning with Hennepin County. And then also several of you managers, Blixt, Shackleton, and White were also part of the Governor's Water Summit, and there's a big packet of information that was shared as part of that. I'm not sure. I'm still looking forward to seeing how all the information gathered that day on the various flip charts will get compiled and shared. I'm not exactly sure. It was an energetic and large group that had a lot of energy and kind of a focus on water issues. So I think it was a great opportunity to see. The next step is to see what comes of that, and if we can kind of help be part of that process to encourage something productive, that would be great. And that was all I had.
Thank you. The meeting is adjourned.